Hi, well, welcome everyone in the audience. I'm Jonty Pearce and delighted today to bring you the first of our autumn webinar series. We've got a very packed series this autumn for you, and we're starting off with a topic that's very close to my heart, which is speech analytics, an executive briefing on speech analytics. I'll briefly run through the agenda. Delighted to be joined by two experts on the subject. Jonathan Wax from Nexidia. Jonathan's spoken with us on a number of webinars over the years. I think the last one was about 18 months ago.
Correct, yeah.
And I know that was very well attended and very well liked. Also delighted to be joined by Chris Barkataki from Experian, based up in Nottingham, who's been using analytics for a couple of years. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
And Chris is going to be taking us through a case study of how Experian use analytics. We'll also be doing top tips from the audience, and we've got a live question and answer session. Before we go into the agenda, I just want to run a couple of polls, and I'd just like to find out who in the audience is already using speech analytics. So we'll have a look at the results up on the screen. So we've got a small number, 17% are already using it. Perhaps not surprisingly, for a briefing on speech analytics, we've got a number of people who are considering, 32% don't have it, and 17% have no plans. So I guess they're the ones that may benefit from some of the business case that Chris will share with his experience on. And then I'd just like to drill down. So if you're not using speech analytics, what I'd just like to look at is which areas do you consider speech analytics most appropriate for you. I'll just pop the poll up on the screen now, and you can select all that apply. So it's call scoring or quality scoring, identifying broken processes, customer insight, marketing programs, or compliance reasons. Jonathan, any thoughts? Which one do you think is going to come out top?
I would say the two I think that most people are looking at it for are actually probably the top two, the first two here. That's the whole idea of call quality monitoring, performance management, how we want to view it, and then the second piece is for process optimization, understanding better what's going on. I think I think the others are all interesting and growing, but I think most people are driven by those two because that's typically where they can put a business case together.
Well, let's have a look at the results and see if you're right on that, Jonathan. Well, actually, it looks like you're right on certainly the first one, and the second one was, well, within a hair's width of getting that. So looks like call quality scoring, identifying broken processes, and customer insight. I guess, Chris, not wanting to take the sales out of your case study, but that's very similar to some of the reasons why you introduced analytics.
Yeah, absolutely. We started with a few very key reasons why we wanted it, and what we found is it's grown over time to cover all of those 5 reasons really. But our initial aims definitely aligned with what Jonathan was saying.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'd just like to then move on to the main part of the agenda now, which is delighted to introduce to you Jonathan Wax of Nexidia, who's going to take us through an introduction to speech analytics. So, Jonathan, if you'd just like to pull the slides up on your screen and take us through your presentation. There we are. Just move full screen. Splendid. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much. Actually, before I go forward, I'll just go back to that last poll. It's interesting to see that customer insights is coming up quite highly because I would say one of our observations is 2 years ago, people were somewhat talking about customer insight, but it wasn't really featuring in people's agenda. And I think more and more people are beginning to sit there and saying that I think there's pressure within the organisation to deliver better customer service, and the understanding that the call centre is a very good way of getting the pulse or the temperature of the customers. So it's interesting to see it's coming through in these polls as well, because we're starting to see more and more companies, I think, actually doing something about that whole customer insight, voice of the customer, whatever you want to call it.
Well, I guess the whole social customer service revolution is meaning there's more emphasis on customer service, and I guess some of it identifying, where is it that those grounds for improvement are.
Yeah. What I want to do is I actually pretty broaden out somewhat from what you talked about. So we currently view the world in terms of, I think, interaction analytics, which is to this exact point. The speech channel has always been a difficult one to analyze, which is why we focus there, but more and more people are looking at other channels. So they're looking at, how you interact through web chats or emails, social media, and also the whole performance management piece. So we wrap all of this up into what we term interaction analytics. So I'm going to definitely talk about speech analytics, but also look at how these other channels come into play. So, and to this point, this is, I think, an introduction to what we do is that out there, if we say 1 million people work in call centres in the UK, which seems to be a number that's roughly about right, that those 1 million people, historically have taken huge numbers of calls, phone calls. The large companies are taking 50, 70 million calls a year. Yes, small operations taking 2,000, 3,000 a week. But there's that vast number. And more and more people are then saying, well, there's other ways of interaction. Some of it driven by cost. So I think people looked at web chat for a lower cost channel, but also the customers are moving their own way. So the growth of social media means people are actually having to bring that into their channels. So we see this absolute plethora of interactions happening. And they're generally being captured within an organization. So whether it's a call recorder or a web chat system, those are there. And routinely, I'd say they've been ignored as a business. They're a huge untapped potential for the business. And so the Nexidia application suite, it really is all about taking those interactions, classifying them, structuring them, and then performing an analysis that supports business transformation. And I think that's the key thing, is that we're trying to help people change the way they do business, and the reasons for doing it are typically, and I think for a long time have been increasing revenue or cost reduction. But again, people are starting to see, and we're seeing it here, this focus on customer satisfaction. And I think Chris will also support this. Analytics isn't a magic box. Plug everything in, it does something. Analytics is a business process, and all business processes still need people. And also analytics is a journey. You may start by doing one thing, but then as that becomes robust, productionized, or you've made the changes, it grows into other areas. So really, I think the key point about what we're looking at is how can you take all of these interactions through different channels and structure them, and I suppose harmonize them so you can start reporting on the totality of this. And that's really the core of what we do, is that ability to take all those interactions and perform the analysis to support what we do. And as I say, we're very happy to be working with Experian. We've been working them through one of our partners' business systems for about the last 2-3 years, and I'm really looking forward to Chris's session a bit later on. The way we've seen the market mature, and I think is probably, again, coming back to tying in with the poll, and for once I can say this was completely unplanned in that sense. We had no idea what the poll was going to do. But we see really, I think there's 3 areas of usage for analytics. The first one is the whole area of performance management. So this is agent performance management. And again, I think a lot of the focus historically has been on voice channel. So everyone's voice channel everyone's probably got a performance management system or a quality form. But actually, with all the other channels, I think it's one of the areas that companies are lagging on. So, how many people have got web chats but then do performance management on web chats, or do quality monitoring web chats? This is harder. So what we're certainly seeing is people bringing that whole performance management piece in together across all channels. The second primary area, the usage, is absolutely process or product optimization. Some industries love the term failure demand. Something has gone wrong within the organization, and that has driven the contact. And the challenge for the contact centers themselves has always been the failure is normally not in the contact center, and they are picking up the pieces from other parts of the organizations and then have to report back to them. And for them to do that effectively, my feeling is you need to be able to provide evidence that is both qualitative and quantitative. You have to be able to say how often it happens, which is the quantitative piece, but the qualitative piece is really sort of the emotional side of it. If you show people what the calls are, how they're manifesting themselves, it's easier to make change. And then lastly, more and more people are sitting there saying, if I want to differentiate on customer service, I've got to understand what my customers want. And so that's this whole customer insight, voice of the customer. And here we're even looking at how we can do some, I suppose, predictors of dissatisfaction. So rather than just doing, I'm going to get a result off surveys, you can say, actually, I can analyze all my calls, just try and get a view of how we're dealing with customers. So these are, I say, the three key areas we've seen the use of analytics. The analytical process itself, I think, typically falls into two areas, and we call them narrative and empirical, or you could call it narrative and quantitative. There are two ways of doing it. And the first one is the narrative view is just getting a high-level view of what's going on. And this is quite often achieved just by sampling or, and I suppose the way we traditionally do it is a narrative view. You go around, ask agents why a call's coming in, or you do a 5-bar gating exercise. You take a small sample and say, I think this is happening. And the advantage of that is it gives you a very quick view. The disadvantage is you may not get something that's relevant, or you may not get the whole size of what's going on. So building on from that, we see the need for real empirical analysis. And this is when you're taking all of the contacts that you've got, and then you're applying, I suppose, what you've learned from the narrative analysis, or what you've learned even just through internal conversations, to that data. So for the example we've got here is, it's the difference between some customers are calling about a missing modem rebate form, because that's the narrative view, through to, well, actually 28% of customers are calling about a missing modem rebate form, and the average handle time of these calls was 37% higher than the norm. We worked with a customer last year when we did a call spike analysis, and they believed there was 3 possible causes to the call spike, and we were able to prove which one it was. But we were also able to show that one of them that wasn't the main cause was also causing about a 300-second increase in handle time. Again, so it needs to be aware of that for the forward planning of their system. And our view is both of these are valid approach to analytics, but really you need to do both of these. And so, I'll talk a bit about how we...
And it would be interesting to hear from the audience, if they'd like to type into the chat room, whether it is sort of narrative or empirical evidence they're tending to be using today. So if you've got a view on the sort of types of analysis, and maybe interesting to look if you had a look at call spike analysis to see sort of what sorts of things you found. Perhaps it'd be interesting to see what you expected to find, whether it differed from what you actually found. So if anyone in the audience would like to do that, the chat room is callcenterhelper.com/chat.
So what I now want to do is just give you some examples of how this works. So this is one of the views we have from the narrative analysis. So this is a word cloud, and really here what we can do with the word clouds is you can take a whole set of interactions, voice-based or text-based, doesn't matter what, and then start to say, okay, what's happening within these? Interestingly enough, these normally take, I think, 2 or so hours to pull together. Can be quite late. Once they're first set up, they then rerun automatically. So again, it's a very easy way to get a view of what's going on, and you can then, once you've got the word clouds, you can then look at those that are gaining or in frequency or losing frequency. So this is one of the views of it. The second is an example. Links back to what we were talking about earlier. This is a company that has some issues, and if you look in on the word cloud here, number of phrases that are going on, but in this case I know the word callback has appeared. So if I look at this, as well as clicking on the callback and going into the interactions, I can also look at the related phrases. So here I can see that there's quite a few of the callbacks are linked to both word service and to today. So if I listen to the calls, it's like, well, I've had to call back several times today because my service isn't working. And so, you can sort of go, right, that's interesting. Is that a big problem? Is this the only person who's had a problem, or have I had a major issue? And so what we then do is, move that to the next stage, which is the quantitative or empirical stage. So here what we've done is saying, right, these are the terms I'm interested in. And then I can use those to build basically a predefined search. And that is then run against all of the data files we've got. And so, for example, so here I can turn around and say, right, these are all the calls where these things happen. And so I can then start to quantify these and go, right, there is something valid here because let's say that related to what we're saying here is the as the connectivity piece. If that hadn't been there at all yesterday and it's now there, you go, that's the size of what's going on. And then I could go through a number of these calls to see exactly where in the call people have this is referring to the callback or the problem with the internet service and the repeat call piece. So again, we're able to go from a view to quantify data with which you can sit and go, yep, this is something I need to action. And then, once that data point's there, you can then, I say, go mad in terms of reporting. But I think the critical thing is it's not a report in its own right. I mean, here's a view of a trend report that we can run, but every time you're in one of these, the application, you can go at any stage onto any of the graphs or the data points and drill back down into the data. And I think this is the other critical point when you're trying to get buy-in internally is here's a number, which is I suppose it's the logical part of it, and here's the calls, which is the emotive part of it, and that's how you can also get buy-in.
Yeah, it's nothing quite like digging out some of those examples of, you identify the trend and the problem. Nothing quite like playing back a couple of examples of that to really get executive buy-in. We asked earlier about call spikes. Alex has said that they identify call spikes by calling the customer back using the voice of customer program.
Yeah.
And then it says we see that what we find in analytics and scrubbing it is really working. So it's sort of, I guess, a correlation of both voice of the customer and analytics working together. Yeah.
And it's interesting you saying about the bringing it to life. One of our we've got one of our large customers. This has actually been rolled out to their CEO, and she uses this as a way to listen to their customer calls because she knows they've got calls and call recording, but this is a way of structuring the calls. So she's selecting ones based on what's going on within their business. So it is being used absolutely to get the executive involved. If we move beyond the voice channel, this is just an example of one of the type of analysis we're doing on web chat. So we know we've got billing calls, and so we can segment the calls because they've come through in a specific line, or else we can again run queries against them to identify billing chats. And then we can quantify those for the sentiment of them. So in this case, we've got negative, neutral, and positive. And what is interesting is in most of the projects we've looked at in this space, even in chat, the handle time for chats or interactions that have got negative and positive sentiments are typically a lot longer than the neutral ones. The neutral ones are definitely transactional. People want to chat about something, they've got a question, it is answered, that's pretty much the end of it. If you look at the ones that end up with positive or negative sentiment, there's multiple turns on the chat and they go on into more details, and they can quite often be 2-3 times the elapsed time of them. The good news is if they're positive, then it's a better experience, but also, again, the negative ones are driving longer. But and again, what you can do here is if I was to drill into, like this case, the negative ones, it could be a very good root cause, start with root cause analysis saying these are negative chats referring to billing or the bills. So what is it about them? And you can quickly drill into them. Moving beyond the text channels, there's also the growth of social media, and this is just a view from our social media app, which is just monitoring channels. This is something we set up a couple of days ago to run, which was very simple, was looking for cable. This is actually set up by one of my US colleagues, because we do a lot of work with cable operators in North America. So it is just fairly generic looking at cable, but one of the interesting things is one of the growing trends, if you look at cable, is Vince Cable, who isn't American, who's the business secretary. And so, we took this off the system about 10 o'clock this morning, I think it was. So this was what's growing over the last few days. And if you drill into Vince Cable, then these are all they're either off Facebook or I think these are mainly off Twitter, but we can look at Twitter or Facebook, any social media service, and saying these are what the feeds are all about. And predominantly, this is all to do with the announcement of the sale of the Royal Mail this morning. So again, the analytics that you can do is to even drill into, let's say, social media channels to say this is what is happening, this is what's trending.
So it's very important to be able to have that facility to exclude keywords as well as look for keywords.
Yeah, and then you can filter down. And again, I think with everything we do, we can start adding other filters to it. Say I'm an interested one to care about. So again, it's bringing relevant data within the organisation.
I think we're going for a poll. Okay. Going for a poll now, so if I just change the screen up, we're going to ask a poll that looks at has a look at speech analytics and what are the internal barriers to deployment of analytics. We'll be going to look at business cases in a while. So just if you could vote on the choices there. See if I can get the poll launched up on the screen. So the options are no. The options are. No, I think we've got a little bit of a technical challenge on that poll, so we'll come back to that in a short while if we can. So I'll just pass back to you, Jonathan.
Okay. Right. So I think the key point is interaction analytics is, to that end, is beyond speech. We can certainly process all the speech interactions, but also it is the ability to move into direct text-based channels, web, email, what have you, but also to understand the social impact of what's going on. That brings us through to, I think, an interesting question, which is, I think everyone, that's what I say, everyone you talk to can see it's a good thing, but there's always a question of justification for it. I know, I can see I can do A, B, and C, but I need to work out the business case. I need to understand what it is. So here's just some examples of some of the key drivers for business cases that we see. First one is really the whole idea of cost reduction, and cost reduction is really going back to the key point of empirical data to support business change. It's understanding the number of contacts and either explicitly explicitly taking them out of the business or finding alternative lower cost channels. So maybe if you do want to move people to a chat channel because it's a better model for you, how do you do that intelligently in a way that works? And I think the areas we see here are understanding processes that drive high call volumes and can those be repeated, but also the whole idea of first call resolution. How is it we can really drive down repeat caller rates? Because lots of companies have view of caller rates but never quite sure how they are. The second area, and this depends on the type of operation you run, but there is always there's the opportunity for, if you have any form of sales activity through whether even if it's sales through service or direct sales, how do you increase the effectiveness of your salespeople? And I think one of the areas that we see here, which also goes back into the cost reduction piece, is understanding the variance between your call center agents. There is not everyone performs at the same level at everything, and it's really understanding, what is the better performance, why is there a better performance, and that's the case true enough in sales, collections, or even in just some of the general service levels. How do you get variance in time? Customer insight is definitely in there, and I think you've typically recorded all your calls. You have every customer conversation you've got on record. Why didn't you do something with it? And it's really understanding what's driving it. And here we see people building up, I think, lead indicators for satisfaction or dissatisfaction, depending on the view of the culture. And it can also move into the whole area of customer effort, which is what's making life good or difficult for customers. And then the last piece is the whole performance management, performance equality programs, linking those to company strategic goals. And I think it's being able to go from a sample to we've done it based on all the calls, and then you can drill down to an individual agents to support the change that's really going to map up on the top three. And then this also does morph into the world of compliance as well.
Okay, we can now go back to the poll we had the technical challenges for, and it is, what are the internal barriers to the deployment of analytics? All that are appropriate. Very appropriate to a business case. So the options are no budget, the barriers of building the business case, technical challenges, conflicting priorities, or executive understanding of the technology. So if you'd just like to vote on that, and we'll see the answers coming through. We've got quite a large number of people who have voted already. Just wait for a couple more answers to come through. So I will just share the results up on the screen. So some quite interesting ones here. No budget. I guess we're still, despite what the news said this morning, still recession and lack of budget is a challenge. But I guess tied in very much with that is building the business case. And I know, Chris, you'll be looking at building the business case in a short while. But interestingly enough, when I run this poll, conflicting priorities is often the issue, and it doesn't seem to be the case so much here, Jonathan.
No, I think I think the executive understanding ties up into the first. If you had executive understanding, you'd probably have an easier time to get they would support building business case, and if they're allocating the budget, they'll help in that. So I think that the top two and the bottom one are actually are quite closely aligned. So.
Yeah. So if anyone's had any luck on submitting a business case, if they'd like to put their experience into our chat room, callcenterhelper.com/chat, very much like to see that. So Jonathan, back to you.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to pick up on just one area very briefly from one of those business case points. Our experience is there are multiple definitions of first call resolution. Different companies have different views, whether it's 2 calls in 5 days, more than 1 call in 7 days. And I think from a number of the projects we've run on, most companies, or very few companies, have a single repeat caller cycle. If you only sell one thing in one way, then you may have a single cycle of repeat callers. One of our customers was a credit card company, and they've been trying to reduce or improve first call resolution for a number of years and were struggling. And then what they realized was that they had at least 3 sets of repeat callers. It was people who got their bill and rang up, and then expecting an action would ring back in 1 or 2 days. There were the ones who probably said it's 3 to 5 working days and rung back in about a week, and then they're the ones who forgot all about it, and then he rang back when they got the next statement 30 days later. So when they broke that down into 3 separate sets of repeat caller actions or repeat caller issues, they were able to address each one of those and reduce their repeat caller rate. I think ultimately they reduced it by about 50%. And I think this is one of the key things for the flexibility from what we're able to provide people is you define what your first call measure is. You may have more than one. It doesn't matter. The data's there. It can be cut and to deliver insight as appropriate to your business. And I think this is a very critical way of understanding how analytics can support multiple needs within a business. The second, I suppose, point of summary I bring in is that the desire to have consistent performance is I think most companies have it, and I think there are challenges now to understand what's going on in the non-voice channel. We've spent 20, 25, 30 years making the voice channel really well run, and then suddenly these new channels are appearing. Some of them are in the contact center, and some of them aren't. I think there's a lot to be learned from what we've done in the contact centers and the other channels. So I think the whole interaction analytics space can help us drive consistent performance across the organization. And so that really is summarizing, I think, where we are with interaction analytics. I'm just going to just add one last point. We've been running a set of workshops through the Professional Planning Forum. We ran them the first set in the summer. These are one-day workshops. The dates are up on the screen now, and these involve lots of what we talked about. There's a hands-on session to understand what it is, how to persuade executives, how to build a business case. So if anyone is interested in attending these, please do contact us and we can sign you up for those events.
Okay, and if they want to get on that, there's the email at the bottom, zbn@nexidia.com. We'll also publish that on the website as well if people want to do that. Thank you very much for that, Jonathan. Very interesting. And if you've got any questions for Jonathan, if you'd like to either type those into the question box or if you'd like to put those up onto the chat room, callcenterhelper.com/chat, where a number of people have left some tips already, and then we'll have a look at those. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to run another poll, and just like to drill down on the top one of the earlier poll, which was to do with quality scoring. And I'd just like to look at what problems do you face in scoring of calls. And I'm just going to launch that, tick all that apply. So the problems are not measuring enough calls, low trust in the whole quality scoring process. We get too busy, team leaders needing better skills, or no technology, or the technology won't allow me to do what I want to do there. So, Chris, I don't know if you've got any thoughts about which of these areas you'd like to come up high.
So it's interesting. I think actually what we found is we just weren't measuring enough calls when we first started looking at this, and I'd imagine that's something that applies to most businesses in terms of trying to make sure they get the right volume, or at least the right sample size to reflect what their performance is like.
Well, you're absolutely on the money there, Chris. So it's almost like you're reading, standing over my shoulder there. I know you're it's about 150 miles away. Let's share the results with everyone. And yes, indeed, not measuring enough calls. I've done a number of surveys where we say, how many calls do you measure? Everyone says, oh yes, between 6 and 10. I say, right, now it's the real number when it gets busy, and it drops quite significantly, which I guess ties into the we get too busy there. Low trust in the process. Also, to a certain extent, team leaders. Technology doesn't seem to be the overarching challenge there. It's just measuring enough calls. But what I'd like to do now is I'd just like to drill down into that in a little bit more detail and say, what is it the biggest single problem that you face in scoring a call? So if you'd like to just type your biggest single issue that you have, which may not be on this, if you'd like to either type that into the question box or into the web chat. Just like to look at what your biggest single issue is there. So if you'd like to type that in now. So just while those are coming through, what we'll do is we'll come back to those challenges in a little while. And delighted now to pass the baton to Chris Barkataki from Experian. And Chris is going to take us through a case study on how you use analytics. So Chris, across to you. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and take us through your presentation.
Sure. Thank you, Jonty. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chris Barkataki, and my role in Experian is the strategy and analytics manager within our operations area. Hopefully you can all see my screen now. I just reflect actually on the point you made earlier, Jonathan, around analytics as a process. And we've absolutely found that as we've gone through this, and totally agree with that sentiment. I think I'll walk you through a bit of the journey we've gone through and actually how it's grown and developed over time. You know, we didn't start up anywhere near as capable as we are now, near the kind of the mid of the journey, should I say. We're nowhere near the end, but absolutely agree that a lot of this is about building those capabilities and building that process within your business to make this really worthwhile. So let me introduce you a little bit in terms of who Experian are and what we do, just to give you some context. So Experian's got roughly about 17,000 employees and across 44 countries, and we provide data and analytics tools to clients. Typically that's for them to be able to manage some credit risk, prevent fraud, also target where they're marketing, and automate some of the decision making. And also we have a number of consumers that will use our products to help them check their own credit files, make sure that their credit score or their creditworthiness is as good as it can be, and protect themselves against identity fraud as well. Hopefully some of you will recognize some of these characters. These are from one of the main products that we service within this operation, which is from Credit Expert. And we've got roughly around 600 people supporting our operations function within Experian. So that isn't just purely on the consumer side of things. We also support the business side of things as well. And we receive roughly around 3 million customer contacts just over that every year. So hopefully that gives you a sense of the scale of the operation that we apply to. So really, I suppose for some of you probably in this kind of scenario at the moment, which is kind of in terms of why do we need it. For those of you that already have it, hopefully this will resonate with you. But we were really finding that we had reached a blind spot to what our customers were saying, and how interactions with our people were playing out. So the quality monitoring was quite limited. We get a little bit of insight from that, but there was just not enough information and not enough insight really into what was really driving customers and how we could do better with that. And also we felt that we'd reached the right scale really to start to see some benefits. So it wasn't, we were only, at the time when we implemented speech analytics, probably about half what I've just talked you through. So actually we weren't that big, but we thought that based on that scale we could still drive some significant improvements. I'll walk you through some of those improvements later on. So then coming on to the business case and what we put in there, we looked at some of the potential benefits. So these align quite closely to some of the stuff you've seen already, so around the cost reduction and looking at how we can improve the processes that we already have, looking at quality assurance and performance enhancement. There was also some compliance and regulatory requirements from a, not necessarily enforced on us, but more from a proactive stance within our organisation to make sure that we were really doing everything we could to be as compliant as possible. Obviously, as a data company, we take our data and how compliant we are with that data very seriously. So we wanted to ensure that we were as clean as a whistle, really, in terms of how we dealt with that and what we did with it. Ultimately, then it came down to the customer experience and the insight that we could gain from looking at that experience. You know, we've been looking at this type of activity on and off through CSAT and NPS for a number of years, but actually really understanding or getting under the skin of what was driving customers' experiences on a more individual basis and trying to pick some of those pieces out there, and we wanted to do that. And then the last point in there around other opportunities, some of this stuff has actually come out, wasn't really necessarily part of our business case, but it's stuff that we found as we've gone through implementing the tool. We found some real opportunities there to use this technology in a more meaningful way. So, for example, looking at the forecasting that we're doing within our workforce planning area, actually having the understanding of why a forecast was or wasn't as accurate as we may like, as we may have wanted it to be, using the capabilities of speech analytics. And we only, I suppose it's worth me saying, we only actually currently use or have the speech analytics functionality. We are looking, our next step, and I'll come to that, but our next step is really looking at the text element as well and what we may be able to do when we introduce that. But we were getting things, so in our industry, when things like electoral roll information is provided, we update the credit files for everybody based on the information sent through from councils. And we were seeing certain call spikes, and we couldn't necessarily understand why. So speech actually helped us to shine a little bit of a light on that. And one of the ways that we phrased it in this business is, it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but actually this is giving you the magnet, so it's not as hard as it may have been before. We also looked at marketing for customer responsiveness. So another challenge, and I used to manage our workforce planning team, so I tried to apply some of the analysis out of this to that area, was we kick off a TV campaign, or we've got TV campaigns planned in future, but we didn't necessarily, or couldn't necessarily, tie TV activity to call spikes as closely as we needed to. You know, we'd know how much we were going to spend, we'd know some of the spots, but we wouldn't necessarily say, right, we've got a staff here, here, and here to be able to cover that more effectively than we currently do. Actually, what we then did, we worked with the marketing team to target certain regions with TV campaigns, and then analysed the responsiveness of customers against the TV spots, and it was some really insightful information, not only from a workforce planning point of view, but then actually we fed that information back into our marketing team to say, actually, you kicked out this TV advert, this is what customers phoned and said more or less frequently than what they used to do. Be aware that these are the kind of things we're getting. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that we looked at was people citing cost as a reason for them not to want to remain with the service. Surprisingly, that came from some of the more affluent areas rather than some of the areas we were anticipating that to come from. And that was purely through starting off with that regional analysis and then kind of digging deeper and deeper and deeper and getting to some of those more interesting points. Lastly, we look at some product testing and learning. So our product teams are very innovative and constantly thinking of new things or new ways to try and enhance our services and enhance the product. And we have built our processes around trying to tie in their ideas and their hypotheses into what we can find out for them and really validate or disprove some of the things that they may be thinking. So we tie it as close as possible to those teams. And as I say, they weren't things we necessarily set out to do when we first thought about speech analytics. These have kind of come along as we've gone through that journey. Ultimately, we need to be able to prove an ROI on all of that, though. So as with any business case, I'm sure in your organisations, it had to wash its face. So let me talk to you a little bit about how we've got there and the journey we've gone through. So we actually started looking at this back in June 2009 and looked at the options and actually worked with Nexidia and business systems to pull together a proof of concept so we could actually see whether we would get any value out of this at all. Actually, the proof of concept, I would thoroughly recommend it if you get the opportunity to it, because we not only got some useful insight that we could that we'd asked for, but we got plenty more that we weren't expecting. So that was a real win for us. It then took us a long time and over a year really to get the wheels in motion within our organisation. So despite we had some senior engagement and we had people up at the more senior levels driving this through, it still took a long time for us to get final approval and actually start to put this in place. And what we decided to do was put a dedicated resource to drive the implementation, and actually that same resource is still using that tool today to help us get that insight. And that for me is one of the cruxes of why this has been successful in our organisation. I think having somebody that really got to grips with the system and really also knew our customers. They actually used to work in our complaints team, so they had a real understanding of what customers' pains and kind of drivers were, and they used that knowledge and that experience to really drive through the analytics. We launched in April 2011, and my first observations actually were, this is great stuff, we've got some really useful insight, but what are we doing with it? You know, what action are we actually driving? Is it just going on someone's desk and they're going, yeah, great, I knew that, thanks very much. So we kicked off our Actionable Analytics Forum in June, which then started to use the information that we had from that insight and to really kind of hone in on, right, what are we actually driving out the back of this? And one of the first wins off that was looking at our attentions areas and the way that we used to script and use calls in that area, and actually turning that around a little bit more to be more effective. And I'll come on to that again in a little bit more detail. And then I'm not going to go through every single project, but ultimately we ended up at in April 2012 really starting to work with the other teams and trying to think about other ways of using the tool. So it's really become embedded in the way that we work here. And actually one of the things we wanted to do was we wanted this to be a tool to drive culture in Experian, to drive that customer-centric culture, not necessarily be sat with a team in a corner of the office and them all doing whizzy stuff and churning numbers and not really sharing it. We wanted to really drive a much more customer-centric culture across our business. We did use existing resource, so actually wanted also to allow other people to have access to this information that wouldn't normally. I know mentioned a CEO having access to it. We haven't quite gone to that extent in this organisation, but we do definitely try and empower as many people as possible to use this information to their advantage and to use us as a sense check as much as possible, but really take that information and use it meaningfully in their own area, and for them to drive their own agenda in that. And just to give you a flavour in terms of how we use it and the balance of how that usage is, we've got roughly just under half the time we're looking at some of the compliance pieces, and that really helps, but also we're looking at initiatives and projects as roughly about close to a third of what we're trying to pick out and trying to drive outside of kind of the business as usual elements of speech. One of the other things I'd say about this was, because we shared this information, it stopped us trying to hold all the cards too close to our chest. It gave us that opportunity to really kind of open that out and allow other people to use the information more meaningfully. One of the key challenges, I think, with anybody trying to roll this out will be how your people take to it. It can be seen as a bit of a big brother type tool if you're not careful, and how that's messaged and how that's managed with particularly your frontline people. And we wanted to make sure that they were part of the overall success of this delivery. So we worked very closely with them to talk to them about actually what we could do, what we couldn't do, using it to help coach them and to support them to actually gain more out of their reward scheme, or to performance manage themselves even more effectively. So we really tried to ingrain it in them how important it was for them to use this information, not something we were using to hold over them like a stick. We've also used it to do some A/B testing. So we've said, right guys, you said this process isn't great. Why don't you go and do what you think the right process is? And we'll use this tool just to make sure that things aren't going too far awry. You know, we can check when that type of call comes through, how long it's taking. You said it's going to be better for the customer and better for you. We can actually just validate that using this tool. So we've used a lot of the capabilities of this tool to allow us to do that, alongside tying that in with our quality monitoring and knowledge processes. But ultimately, it's given us we're talking about empirical data, it's given us some of that to really use at the end of those tests. And obviously, using their ideas, you know, there's lots of things coming from them in terms of what they would like to see. We've had a process recently where they've said, you know what, processes and procedures are too rigid. We would really like to go outside of process to help customers do this. And this has kind of helped us to do that and to relax some of the constraints on our frontline colleagues, where we can say, look, we can give people the opportunity to go outside of process, because this tool and the way that we want to try and change our culture is definitely supporting them in doing that. Whereas historically we'd get a lot of nervousness, particularly in more senior people, saying we're not sure that we want to kind of let go of the reins too tight, you know, too much so far. So it's enabled some of that stuff. Just very quickly in terms of the process that we go through when we're looking at evaluating success. So I mentioned the Actionable Analytics Forum. We introduced this framework, and typically it's used for all the different analytics we now do in my team. So we look at bringing an idea in, planning and prioritizing where that might sit against all the other ideas that we've got. Well then, once we've decided to kick off a piece of investigative analysis, we'll do that piece of work, and then we'll go back to a team of people across the whole of the operation and engage with people outside of operations where necessary to discuss and debate what we think that's telling us and what we think we can do with it. Ultimately, we want to drive those actions and gain some results, so we focus on driving things through this process as quickly as possible to start to see some of those results. And then the key thing really is then tracking those results. One of the kind of schoolboy errors we made right early on was, you know, sticking some stuff out there and going, great, it seems to have worked for the last month, let's leave it. We go back to it 3 or 4 months later and go, well, hang on a sec, stuff has gone right back to where it was before we implemented this change. So we've had to go back and work through those changes and ensure that those changes are embedded for much longer. So just to give you an idea in terms of what we've seen, we have significantly exceeded what we thought our return on investment would be. Predominantly that's just down to efficiency and revenue, and as you can see from our graph, I'm not putting values in here, but it's been a growing revenue.
That's a very large return on investment there. What did you anticipate it to be then, Chris?
So when we originally thought about it, we were looking at 3 to 4 times was the conversation we were having.
Wow.
And it wasn't necessarily over a given time frame, but we weren't anticipating to be able to make as many changes as we have done from that initial launch, I don't think. I think the way that we looked at it was, oh great, we've got this analysis, we've got this insight, let's go do that, and that's going to deliver everything we need and we'll be happier. And actually it just, you know, it's like slowly opening a can of worms, because we've gradually gone through all of that and found out what we wanted to buy. So then I suppose the bits it's really helped us to do is we kind of call it the DNA of a call. We've mapped some more of what that means for us. So to give you an idea about actually how much time is spent discussing customers' needs, we looked at that and said, well, are we spending enough time? Can we do more to improve that? Can we do more to have a discussion as opposed to focusing on just purely the processy elements of the conversations that we're having? And also it helps us to identify waste and remove some of those things. One of the key things for us as well was, I mentioned we had somebody from our complaints team, so Lee, was very good at trying to pick out what was being said and understanding where those phrases were coming from. I'll give you an example. I mentioned cancels earlier. So when you're looking at retentions, you know, customers typically will say, I want to cancel. And then we're looking at cancel information, customers typically saying cancel. So the two things sound very similar, and we can find there's some error in the way that we would pull back calls. But actually having that insider knowledge and having that appreciation for the type of conversation that will happen before the word cancel and after the word cancel gave us a real opportunity to then split those two terms very much apart. So I know that we picked out a couple of phrases or words particularly, but actually we found with the way that our processes work, it's actually more of the phrasing and certain words after other words, maybe not directly after, but within a certain time frame after. So it's that kind of, I kind of term it as an advanced searching functionality, but that kind of way of working is definitely important if you're looking to integrate this, particularly into anywhere with any kind of complexity. And then I mentioned very briefly retentions. Actually, one of the things we did is we wanted to make sure that we were closing calls with clear scripting, so that customers understood if they were deciding to remain with us, then they were very clear that we had an agreement with them that that was what was going to happen, and this is the process that we were going through. And for a retentions person to be saying, you do realise that you will next get billed on such and such a date, and this is what we're agreeing to. So then they felt like they were going to do worse by almost having that conversation, because they were worried that it would mean that that customer wouldn't stay. Actually, what we surprised ourselves with, but managed to prove, was by having those reasonable conversations with customers and getting that agreement up front, customers are actually more loyal. Customers stayed with us for longer, and it shouldn't really surprise us, but it kind of did. So as you can see on the top right corner, we did improve our scripting, and actually that improved customer loyalty at the same time. So we're very pleased with how that pulled through. I suppose just before I finish up, I'll just give you kind of a very quick snapshot of a case study that we've gone through, which is around a student proposition and kind of building a case for whether we've got an opportunity to either develop a product or educate people more meaningfully in terms of what does credit information mean. So we had people on the call center that were saying, look, we've got these guys are phoning through, they're students or they used to be students, and they've always got the same kind of problems. Is there anything we can do to help or educate them? So we used the analytics to look at actually what do we already know, what can we kind of glean from the basic information. So I talked a little bit about regional analysis. You can see that there's a little bit of information about actually the regions that they may reside in, and then there's also the kind of the things of why they're contacting. So actually a lot of people were just talking about access and cancellation.
Hi everyone, there seems to have been a problem. Everyone seems to have been muted. I'm not sure what happened to Chris. Jonty.
We're still online here. So
Right.
We'll pull Chris back in. Not quite sure what happened there. So I'll just pass the baton across to me. We've had some quite interesting feedback in from the audience, looking at what are the problems with quality scoring. Paul has said moderation, consistency across the community. Daniel said we can't score enough calls. Rizwan has said listening to the right number of calls. Also, we don't record calls where we make payments, which is quite interesting. Alex said the quality team identifies the agents that needs training and trains them. Rizwan has said a second issue is not being able to feed back to advisors immediately. So quite a range of different answers there. I've got a load more, but we're running a little short of time, so I wanted to go to your part in the audience to leave in your top tips for speech analytics or indeed for quality scoring. We've had a small number of tips today, so very good chance of winning a bottle of champagne. So let's see if we can. Looks like we may have Chris back online currently. Chris, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, we can indeed. We've had to jump forward in the audience. We lost you for some reason there. So the first tip is sent by Alex, who says, scrub the output of a call. We use speech analytics to see how well our agents are doing and where training is needed. Primarily, we want our agents to perform on an A level on the phone, but an A level performance on the phone is worth nothing if the output, an instant in the CMS, is bad. So we have also have L2 agents, that must be level 2 agents, checking 25% of all tickets logged. we do this based on some 16 criteria we've identified. So certainly scrubbing the output of the call seems important there. Let's have a look at Nikhil says, pick up the call driver with the high call volumes or poor customer experience scores, then look at what is being mostly said, the words used, phrases by the customers, and use these words to understand and identify the issue. Add the issue to a log and follow through to a resolution. This way issues can be assigned critically, as we know the call volumes are being driven into the call center and the experience on the same. I guess, Chris, is this the sort of thing that you've been experimenting with in your center?
Yeah, so I totally agree with you've got to pick up in terms of what what's being mostly said from those customers. I think the challenge is really prioritizing those developments. There's I don't know if for people that don't have it, we used to get a lot of noise from people in the contact center saying, look, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. And actually, just by using the tool just to quantify actually how big a problem was it, that was always a starting point for us. But I totally agree with the sentiment there about identifying them and then definitely driving those things through until resolution.
Okay, let's have a look at the next one. Companies can use speech analytics to monitor customers and agents at the same time. Managers can track agents' adherence to processes, policies, scripts, and ensure that the regulatory requirements are met. SA, that's speech analytics, I guess, can also be used for coaching call agents, improving resolution, reducing fresh and repeat call volume. Operational issues can be tracked and managed, leading to improved service quality. So, Jonathan, how much do you find compliance is used to adhere to policies, and which I guess may not be compliance, but in the legal sense of the word, but internal?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. There's two types of compliance. There's regulatory compliance because you've got the FCA or whoever it may be monitoring you, or you have internal compliance, which is and I think so Chris referred to it is the use of consistent scripting, the use of consistent close as to what action is going to happen next, drove up retention. And I think there's a role for both. And if you have to do regulatory compliance, you have to do it. There's no way out. But I think people can use it far more to get it's come back to a consistency of what you want, and that's internal compliance.
Yeah, and Chris, I think compliance was your biggest single issue. Was that one that you had identified from the start?
So it wasn't necessarily compliance was the issue. I think that for us was it was a useful byproduct of having this solution in place. For us, it was we had to make the return on investment. So we were looking at our retention teams and our in terms of what we were saying and how customers were reacting to it was really the key thing for us. But I do agree in terms of the compliance elements. It's been very helpful for us to target where we think we've got the highest risk on calls, just by listening to, using this tool to hone in on the areas where we think we've got the biggest risk and making sure we take action in that respect.
And it looks like Nikhil's trying to win this bottle of champagne. Another major benefit we've recently realized from the speech analytics tool is identifying evasion and mis-selling. Since the identification of the agent becomes easy, it drives ethical practices amongst the agents. I guess if people know that you're being monitored, a bit like with web usage in the company, it does tend to change behaviour. It's just the sheer access,
Yeah, and I think tied into that, if the tool is being used to drive agent performance, and so if team leaders have it and they're coaching people based on all of their calls, as I say, in a timely manner, then I think absolutely you're able to find, and some of it may not be mis-selling, but there may be some practices that are not quite as what you want them to be. So it's not illegal or whatever it may be, but it's just getting better behaviours. And I think it's the fact that you're being coached on something. You say, oh, that was a one-off, and you go, it wasn't a one-off because here's another example or another example.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this week.